Right, so we're going to cover body composition and what kind of results you can expect from your body, how long it's going to take you, what are the things that are going to matter, what are the things that are going to help you, what are the things that are going to slow you down, and ultimately how you're going to compare to other folks in their fitness journey. So I'm going to focus on three main things. First one is genetics, then we got mindset slash environment, and then lastly we have health. So all of these three things are going to essentially determine how fast and what kind of results you're getting. Now, full disclaimer, this is mostly going to be observational based on my experience working with real folks. I'm not going to get too deep in any of these topics. This is just to get you an idea of what are the things that are important and to give you more of a realistic expectation in terms of the results that you're going to be achieving. Obviously, some of the things that I may say may not apply to you. Some of them may be very relevant to your specific situation. First, let's talk about genetics. Or rather, before this, let's talk about body compositions because the body composition is ultimately going to determine how you look, how you function, and how healthy, to an extent, how healthy you are. It's not the most important thing in terms of health, but pretty important. What is body composition? That's the ratio between muscle, for the most part, between muscle and fat. So ideally, the more muscle you have and the less fat you have, the better your body's going to look and the better you're going to function physically and mentally. Now, there are certainly extreme situations where having too much muscle may be a bad thing and being too lean may be a bad thing, but you do not have to worry about this. And chances are it's never, ever going to be a problem for you. In order to have too much muscle, you probably have to have a very serious genetic disorder or to be abusing certain types of drugs in training, but that's, again, unless you're trying to compete in a bodybuilding show, that's probably not going to be a problem for you. Can you be too lean? Again, of course, yes, for sure. But you either in the Western world, you're probably not going to get to a point where you're starving and you're getting too lean. The only exception is, again, unless you're trying to compete in a specific sport that has that in order to compete well, you have to be super lean. But even to get there, it's very challenging that most people are never going to get to a point where they're so lean that it becomes a problem. This being said, let's talk about what's going to determine how much muscle you can put and how lean you can get. So we're going to cover genetics first. And it may sound counterintuitive, but in my experience, genetics are the least important thing that's going to matter in terms of the progress they're going to make. So I'm going to explain why. When we talk about genetics, I'm not going to cover individual genes, and I'm not qualified to do this. However, I've done a couple of different gene tests. I've had them reviewed by people who are experts in the field, and I've worked with enough individuals in order to have an idea of this person's starting point, and they can probably achieve this much by the end of their fitness journey due to looking at people with different characteristics, different starting points. And I can sort of sense certain things, whether they're going to help them or whether they're going to make things harder for them. Now, with genetics, I'm just going to cover a couple of basic characteristics. I'm not going to go too deep. The first one, bone structure. And this is probably not the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to genetics and how important they are, but bone structure is big. You know how certain people they have a very big and bulky frame, whereas some people have a very slim and slender frame. So I'm a very good example. I have a very slender frame. So I'm a little bit over 6 foot, so 184 centimeters. And I'm currently sitting around 70-ish kilos, or that's, let me convert this into pounds, 155-ish pounds. So again, this is my normal weight, and I've been training for quite some time, and I have a lot more muscle than when I started. But my frame is very, again, slim, slender, very small. So my wrist is basically this big. So that's a very small wrist for a male. Whereas some people have their very large, thick bones. They're built like a tank. So this is a very general observation, and it's not the most important thing. And there's going to be a lot of exceptions. But for the most part, bigger, thicker frames tend to allow people to add and hold on to more mass. Now, when I say mass, don't specifically, I'm not going to specifically focus on muscle. Could basically mass. It could be fat, could be muscle. There are certain other characteristics that are going to make you more likely to hold on more muscle versus fat. So that's a different genetic component. But for the most part, bigger frames can hold on to more mass. Smaller frames, they tend to not hold on as much mass. And it's going to be very unlikely to see a guy like me who has a very slender, small frame to get like very big and to get like either overweight or very muscular. It's highly unlikely. Can it happen? Yes, but your bone structure is going to allow you to support a certain amount of mass. Now, it's not just the thickness and how bulky your frame is, also certain other things that matter. And let me just bring up my list. These are going to be the ratios between different portions of your body. So, for example, how long your legs are, how long your torso is, how long your limbs are relative to somebody else. So, you may have two people at the same height, but one person can have longer legs and shorter torso. So, they're going to appear differently. And generally, the more thicker parts of their body are probably going to be able to hold on to more mass. And also, as you know, longer bones, whether somebody's like overall taller or has longer limbs, they tend to appear smaller. So the longer something is, the less bulky is going to appear. And the opposite is also true. So this could also influence in terms of visually how you look and also in your ability how to add mass to certain structures. Also, the size, certain, let me just give you a couple of examples. How do you build an amazing back? Amazing back is probably going to be genetics. Great back, you can definitely build regardless of your genetics. But if you want to have an amazing back, it's going to come down for the most part to the ratio between your shoulders versus your hips. So if you want to have a nice V taper, you want wide shoulders and narrow hips. And this is like your structure. Sure, if you have a lot of fat around your hips, you can remove that fat and get your waist even smaller, but there's a point where you reach the bone and you cannot make the bone smaller. So you remove all the fat. And if you have somebody who has narrow shoulders and wide hips, they're going to look like a block, like a fridge. They're not going to have a very nice V taper. They're going to be more square. You can certainly add more mass to your shoulders to make your shoulders appear bigger, but you cannot make your hips smaller. So, can you build a big back even though structurally you may not have the genetics? Yes. But if you want to have an absolutely amazing back, you're probably going to be held back by in terms of your structure and ratios. Another good example is if you have a very flat chest and a small rib cage, you're probably not going to have an amazing pec chest development, chest muscles. But if you have a very round and big rib cage, again, that may allow you to add more mass, and probably your baseline muscle mass in terms of your chest is going to be higher than somebody else. Now, this is not the most important thing. I'm just listing a couple of components that may make a difference in terms of muscle development and in certain cases may aid you in terms of fat loss. So ratios between different structures make a big difference. And I'm not trying to discourage anyone, by the way. The example I like to give is think in terms of basketball. So people who are great, amazing basketball players are people who are tall and have long wingspan, so long arms. Can you be an amazing basketball player and even if you're not super tall? You can get a pretty good player, but you're probably not going to be signed off for the NBA. It's just an example. So it's the same with genetics. They can, to an extent, limit in terms of what you can achieve. Now, these are not good or bad things. When I'm talking about a large V taper, don't think, oh, I don't have those proportions. It's going to be really bad. A nice V taper is not necessarily good for everything. So having large and thick hips can help you be stronger and more stable for certain exercises. People who are very strong, they don't have narrow hips. So there were certain ratios that I'm talking. And again, having a very slender frame versus a very bulky frame, it's not a good or a bad thing. It may be good for certain things. It may be bad for certain other things. As I said, having a large frame may make you more prone to adding a lot of mass, which if it's fat mass, it's not a good thing. But if it's muscle mass, it's a good thing. So again, it's not good or bad. I'm just listing different genetic traits that are for the most part neutral. They could give you an advantage in a certain thing, and they may be a disadvantage in another thing. Same with having like a large rib cage and a big chest, may be great for pressing movements if you want to do some powerlifting, but for some other sports, may not be such a good thing. Now let's continue on with the list. We have bone structure, bone ratios. Now muscle. Muscle shape is another thing. So it's not just the size of the muscle, it's the shape of the muscle. And it doesn't mean just because you have more muscle, it's gonna appear bigger. So again, I'm gonna give myself an example. So you can see my biceps. It's not particularly bulky. It's very elongated. So my muscles are very elongated and they don't appear big and bulky. They're not very round. Whereas some folks, their bicep is kind of like this. It's a big ball here. Their chests are very big and bulky. Doesn't mean that all your muscles are going to be like this. I'm just illustrating a couple of examples, but generally people who have like rounder, bulkier muscles tend to have them all across the body, not just like a couple of exceptions here and there. So the shape of the muscle can also make you appear a certain way, even though you don't have as much muscle mass. So if you're thinking, oh, I want to have like these like very round muscles, like my friend, but you have a very like lean and elongated musculature, even if you have more muscle than them, you may not appear the same way. Again, that's not a good or a bad thing. Typically, that type of musculature is a little bit more explosive, a little bit more powerful, but it doesn't have the same capacity for endurance. So people who have like lean, elongated muscles or smaller muscles tend to have better endurance and better cardio and tend to do better in certain physical activities. Again, I'm overgeneralizing here. The point I'm trying to make is that it's not a good or a bad thing, but just keep in mind that genetics can influence in terms of how you look and how you perform. All right, so got the shape of the muscle. Also, let's talk about muscle attachment. Now, as I said, big arm muscle is not the most important thing. It's the shape of the muscle and also how it attaches. I'm gonna again use my bicep as an example. So you see my bicep starts from here and ends here. And there's a gap here where it's tendon, it's not muscle. But some people's biceps start from here and end here. So they have this lump from here to here, all the way to the elbow crease. The attachment of the muscle makes a huge difference because as you see, my bicep ends here. It doesn't attach at least the bulk of the muscle doesn't get all the way to the elbow, which means that even if I make my muscle bigger, there's always going to be that gap of about, I think it's about an inch, where there's no muscle and it cannot grow bigger because the bulk of muscle is not there. It's just connective tissue. Somebody who has a longer biceps that runs all, or at least the bulk of the biceps is longer, runs all the way to their elbow, their muscles are gonna appear bigger and they're probably gonna grow more because there's more surface. And you've seen like another example is calf muscles. So some people complain they cannot grow their calf muscles. That's because their calf muscles attach very high, or the bulk of the muscle is very high. Whereas for some people, their calf muscle can go much lower, closer to their ankle. So there's more surface area that could potentially grow and get bigger. So unfortunately, for certain things, like the shape of the muscle and the attachment of the muscle, you don't have much control. You can make it bigger, but you cannot change the size or the attachment. It's always the outcome is going to be better than before. I'm just saying that if you're looking up, when you see certain folks, especially online and social media, they probably have certain genetic advantage. And if they have like amazing arms, you may never be able to grow the same arms as them, even though you may have bigger arms than them, but they may not look the same way and they may not perform the same way as well. So certain things are gonna, to an extent, influence the end result. Now, let's talk about ability to grow and maintain muscle. Certain folks can grow muscle faster and maintain faster than other folks, so they don't need the same amount of stimulus as somebody else. That's why you would see people go in the gym. Like if you're trained with somebody else, you may notice that they grow much faster than you, or they may have a more stressful life and despite this grow more. So certain folks are going to be very much affected. So if they don't sleep, let's say 8 hours, they only sleep 7 hours, it may have a huge effect on their ability to grow muscle. Whereas some other folks, they're not going to be affected that much. They may be sleeping, let's say 6 hours a night and grow muscle much faster than you who are sleeping like 8 hours. So the ability to grow muscle and then the rate of muscle growth is also going to vary across individuals. Now, this is just one component. Again, it's not a good thing or a bad thing. And also, people who generally tend to grow muscle faster, to an extent, may also struggle with fat loss. So this is a different genetic characteristic. Some people are more prone to accumulating body fat than other folks. So you probably have friends like this who, let's say, for example, they don't eat that much, but they can almost immediately can see the fat accumulation on a specific body part. Whereas certain other folks, they're able to lose fat very fast. Certain folks can maintain their weight very easily. Certain folks is like fluctuating up and down. So certain folks are gonna have easier time adding more mass, but having trouble reducing that mass. Other folks are going to be the opposite. They're going to struggle to grow, to add more mass, but they're going to very easily reduce their body weight. So there are certain genetic components in terms of your ability to grow muscle. or in general accumulate mass, whether it be fat or muscle. And sorry, for some people, it's going to be the different. Metabolism is another thing. So how you use energy, how efficiently you use energy can also vary. So for some people, they may need to go very low in terms of their calories in order to lose weight, whereas some other folks, they may not have to do that. Now, certain people can, let's say, can only, after increasing their intake by just a small amount, start gaining weight. And again, I'm going to give myself as an example. For me, in order to start gaining weight, I may need to increase my intake by an extra 5 to sometimes 1,000 calories on top of what I'm already eating, which is super, super rare. My metabolism adapts very quickly. And I've seen people who you just give them extra 200 calories and they immediately start gaining weight. So there's a huge difference between individuals and what they need to do in order to get certain results. Again, the main point I'm trying to make is people are different. You don't want to compare yourself to other folks. Appetite, another thing. So some people have a very high baseline appetite. They're very hungry. And especially if they go on a diet, they get ravenous. Whereas with some other folks, I mean, you see them, they barely eat. Their baseline appetite is very low and they can stay lean very easily because they just don't feel hungry. Now, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? No, it's neither. It's neutral. If you're trying to gain weight, and especially if you have good genetics for building muscle, having a high appetite, definitely a good thing. Now, if you're trying to lose weight and you have genetics for maintaining high body fat levels and you really struggle with fat loss and you have high appetite, that's probably a bad combination. It's going to make it harder for you. But in generally, high appetite can help you with certain things, and it's going to make certain other things much more trickier for you. I generally myself don't have a very high appetite, so if I'm trying to gain weight, it's a struggle for me. So I'm suffering sometimes. I know it may for certain people it may sound like a amazing thing, but trust me, if you're trying to gain weight and you're not enjoying food and you're just shoving food in your face and you're feeling sick because you're always full, it's not fun. So appetite, another thing that can be very different between individuals. Another one. This is how do I put this? There's a term for it. It's NEAT, NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So some people are very, very fidgety. They're just constantly moving. They're blinking faster. They're talking faster. They're doing stuff with their hands. They cannot stand still. They're very fidgety. Guess what? They burn a lot of calories unconsciously. So for myself, I can't really control how fast I'm blinking. My body's just very fidgety. Some folks, they're very chill and relaxed. They're almost like very slow, and they probably don't burn as many calories, which means that it may be much harder for them to lose weight because they need to, especially if they, depending on their appetite, they may need to eat much lower amounts of food and exercise more because they have to be more conscious about their actions. Whereas some folks, if they just have them on a chair, they just sit, they start fidgeting, they burn extra calories. Actually, a funny thing that happened with a client, he he was working for a couple of hours on a chair, desktop job, and he checked his phone, which was in his pocket, and he saw that he did 5,000 steps because he was tapping his leg so fast, and the phone was in the pocket that the phone was measuring his step count, even though he was sitting on a chair. So he had literally was burning a ton of calories by sitting on a chair, not even doing anything consciously. So that's another like genetic component there. The last one I want to briefly mention, this is personality. Now, there is still a genetic component there. I know how certain people are very driven, very go, 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 go. They are like usually the high achievers. They strive for being the best in everything. Now, if you give them a certain sport, they may perform very well. If you put them in the gym, they may push very hard. If you put them in a race, they're probably going to give their best. So they're kind of like very intense in their personality. Whereas some folks, they're very chill, they're very relaxed, they're almost like slow, and they don't want to push too hard. They like comfort a little bit more. Now, this person, if you put them in the gym, they're probably not going to get, I'm not going to say get the same results, but they're not probably going to be exercising as intensely, and the same maybe applying to the diet. Now, is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? It's relatively neutral. So for certain things, being too intense, being too hardcore may get you injured. And also some of those people once they achieve their goal, they want to move on to the next thing and they may completely wipe up all their progress. Whereas the more relaxed individual may be slow and steady, but then be able to maintain their results. Now, as a sort of want to wrap up this whole genetics conversation, two things that are a big takeaway. First off, never compare yourself to somebody else, how fast they're getting results, the type of results they're getting, because they probably have different genetics. They may give them an advantage or a disadvantage. Second thing, genetics don't offer a clear advantage or a disadvantage in general, only for a specific goal, for a specific time frame. Meaning that with appetite, as I said, having a big appetite is the problem. It's only a problem if you're trying to lose weight and you're really struggling with hunger, but otherwise it's not a problem. Certain structures, frames, and so on can give you an advantage in a certain thing, in a disadvantage in another thing. But if you have the same person, their goals change. It's never going to be, oh, I want to lose fat for the rest of my life, or I want to gain weight for the rest of my life. So your priorities and goals are going to change. That's why certain things are going to feel harder, but certain things are going to feel easier, even though you're still the same person with the same genetics. So a very important thing. And let's, sorry, I'm sorry for the coughing. Same thing with personality and so on. So, important thing to realize is that genetics are not the most important thing in my experience. And also, even you may be thinking, what if I have like a combination of very, very bad things for my goal? Let's say you have high appetite, low metabolism, very prone to gaining fat, very hard to lose fat. You are have like a bigger brachial structure. However, it's only promoting fat loss, not muscle growth. You're more prone to stress, and you're very like a slow individual. You want to keep it relaxed. So that's probably a very bad combination for fat loss. In my experience, you never get anybody who is having like this amount of quote unquote bad genetics for a specific goal. If they have a certain disadvantages, they're always going to have advantages in other things. So you never get such a bad combination. And even if it is, there's still it's genetics are still not the most important thing, which is a nice segue to the next point I want to discuss. In my experience, when people don't get results or get poor results, it's never ever genetics. Genetics only play a role in terms of how long it's going to take and the end result, the very, very end as a result after many, many years of training and dieting and so on. However, they're not going to be the thing that's going to lead to failure or to giving up. The most important thing, other than health, which I'm going to leave for last, is going to be your mindset. So the people who get the best results, who get the best results relative to what their body's capable of, obviously, genetics being the cap, but in general, people who do very well, these are people who are very driven and they have a very strong why. So if you ask me whether certain individual is going to do well or they're not, or they're going to give up soon, I'm always going to try and figure out what's their why. Is there a strong reason? Typically, there's a strong motivational driver. Unfortunately, it's usually a negative driver. So let's say somebody has a health scare, somebody has a relationship breakup, relationship drama, they feel insecure, they want to build a better body, they want to lean down, they want to bulk up, whatever the case is. Kids, another one, they want to be a role model for the kids, they want to be a great parent, great grandparent, and so on. So typically it's coming from a place of pain and wanting to do better, and there's a very strong why, a reason why you want to do this. If you're like, yeah, it would be cool to have abs, it would be cool to have more muscle, chances are not going to get far. Unless there's a high emotional charge there, you're probably going to fail. I mean, I hate to bring this to you, but that's the reality. That's what I've seen with most people. Now, the only exception is, let's say somebody who is a genetic freak, they touch the barbell in the gym and they grow a ton of muscle, or they just start lifting very light weights and they start losing a lot of weight. There are certain individuals, but this is the exception, and they typically don't do well in their long term because they give up very easy because there's no reward. I mean, it just happens to you naturally that you don't tend to stick to it. So having a strong reason, having a strong why, very important. That's in my experience the thing that's going to determine how far you're gonna get and the extent to which you're going to enjoy what you're getting in return. With mindset, I also want to discuss environment. So environment is the second component, and unfortunately, it can undermine you a lot more than genetics can. What's environment? So it's a combination of different things. The let me just check something in my notes real quick, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, when I was talking about having a strong emotion or a strong why, I was mostly focusing on the negative emotional charge. However, there could be a positive emotional charge. Let's say you have a photo shoot coming, you got a wedding coming, it's a bet, maybe, or maybe you want to get shredded for the summer. Again, that's probably not the best type of motivation, but provided you have a strong why, that can still be a good thing. So it doesn't always have to be a negative emotion that's driving you to achieve a lot. It could sometimes be a positive emotion, but in my experience, this is typically not the case. Like most people come to me because they're going through some really tough time. Oh, all right, back to the environment. So environment typically can support or have the opposite effect on how well you're doing. Things like stress, be it work stress, relationship stress, kids. I mean, we got kids. We got guys with 5 kids or multiple kids. People who are going through divorce. What else? Um, Work. Just how much available time you have. Peer pressure. Let's say your family is overweight, and for them it's normal to have a little bit more body fat. So we have a lot of people with Indian background, and from what I understand, in this culture, being very lean, it's it's not something, it's not frowned upon, but people think that you have a problem if you're very lean. So in that culture, from my understanding, I could be wrong. It's normally accepted to have a little bit of extra fluff. So if you're getting too lean, it's not a good thing. In Asian cultures, again, being too bulky, being too muscular may not be a good thing. So there could be like some cultural things, some family pressure, peer pressure. If you start doing certain things, people may start judging you, or maybe they're not going to support you, or if you work in an office and there's like a lot of junk food always there in the office available, guess what? It's going to be really hard for you to stick to your diet. So having a strong why is very important, but also manipulating your environment so it supports you. It's also going to be have a huge impact because especially if you don't have a strong why, your environment can literally break you. If you live in a place where there's a lot of food availability like junk food, and everybody around you is very unhealthy and they're not eating healthy and they're not exercising, it's going to wear you down, and it's going to make it much harder for you to maintain your goals of being leaner, fitter, bigger, or whatever your case is. However, if your environment is supporting you, it's going to be much easier for you. So to a certain extent, you can overpower and ignore this if you have a very, very strong why. Now, I'm the person who I've been going to work with Tupperware. I've refused to eat food at restaurants when it was not supporting my food goal. So my mindset was such that, I don't care what people are saying, what people are judging, how people are judging me, or their comments and so on. I'm going to do my thing. But this is super hard, and honestly, it's very mentally taxing, and it's not sustainable. So, given your situation, you also want to be realistic in terms of what results you're going to be getting, because no matter how strong your why is, or what your reasoning for doing what you're doing is, if you're having like 5 kids, 2 jobs, you're taking care of your grandparents because they're sick, there's in the office, there's always junk food, and you're getting invited to like different dinners, or you have to travel a lot, is it going to be easy to hit your goals? Probably not. Is it going to be impossible? No. So the same case with genetics. I mean, genetics can definitely make a big difference. They're not the most important thing, but they're certainly pretty important. Same thing with your environment. Now, I would argue that the environment is far more important than genetics, because you may have certain folks with great genetics and you put them in a bad environment and they're not going to do well. So being realistic in terms of what you can achieve given enough time, always factor in your environment, whether it supports you or it's working against you. And it doesn't mean that you have to give up. It just means that things may be happening much slower than you would like. And the last thing I want to discuss, hopefully briefly, that's going to be health. Health, unfortunately, it's also a big component. And I'm going to give you an example with a client with I have many of these examples, by the way, but this one was my first experience with how health can literally make it almost impossible for you to get results, no matter how hard you're working. So we're working with this guy. He was about 200 pounds and pretty overweight. So he had a lot of extra body fat. However, he was very driven. So he had a very strong why. He was taking care of his, I think, grandma at the time. He really wanted to get in shape because of her. He was very, very motivated. And we started him on about like 2,000 calories a day, or maybe like 21 to 2,200 calories, which is pretty good for somebody who's 200 pounds overweight. Cardio twice a week, going to the gym 4 times a week with weights, 10,000 steps. Now, if you don't know anything about fitness, if you don't know how to get in shape, just going to tell you that this is a pretty standard protocol. It's definitely going to get you lean if you're healthy. He was, from what he told me, he was following this approach for about a couple of weeks, but nothing was happening. He was not getting results. So I started asking some questions. Okay, are you following the diet? I started checking his diet. I started like double checking that he's doing the work. And he said that he was following everything. And even based on the data that he was providing, he was working hard, but he was not losing weight. Now, fast forward to the first month, no results whatsoever. Now I get suspicious. We get on a call, we start talking, and I mean, he says that he's doing everything, but I'm pretty much convinced that he's lying or that he is definitely not telling me something because there's no way you can train with weights 4 times a week. These were not super easy workouts. Do cardio twice a week, 10,000 steps, and the diet and everything, and you're not losing weight. Just not possible. Okay, it's been a month. Now he's starting to complain that, the program's not working. And okay, I'm like, okay, let's get a second opinion. So we got another person on the call, another coach. We double check all the data, everything that he was doing. Everything checks in. He's doing all the right stuff, but he's still not getting results. So we started like suggesting maybe like certain supplements. We started suggesting blood work and so on. So overall, nothing too crazy there, but he was still not getting results. Now, this is 2 months in. I'm getting irritated. The client is getting irritated. We still have no clue what's going on. Now, at this point, something very, I was very surprised at the time. I didn't know why it was happening. Now I have an understanding. But he started gaining weight. So he went from 200 pounds to 201, 202, 203, 204, 205. His weight continually started increasing. Now he's getting very frustrated and I'm getting very agitated and I'm trying everything in the book. So we started like changing the diet, changing the workout, changing the steps and everything. I started double checking everything just to make sure everything's going well. Nothing. He eventually went from 200 to 220 pounds. I was like panicking at this point. Like, this guy is paying me money and things are not happening. And I'm doing everything by the book. So, long story short, I've reached out to a couple of coaching friends. I've did some paid consultations with my coach at the time. So I've hired another guy as well to just give me a second opinion. And turns out after like a lot of back and forth with people who are much smarter than me, that my client was pre-diabetic, that he was dealing with a lot of inflammation, and he was very much intolerant to carbs. Even small amounts of carbs were causing him to get massive inflammation and to retain extra water, and basically was messing up very bad. Now, with the understanding that I have, I think there were other issues that were happening at the time just based on his symptoms. But what we did is we put him on keto, and I'm not suggesting keto for everybody. I'm just saying that in this particular example, we put him on keto and he started losing weight. Turns out that he had a very much a life-threatening health condition. He was dealing with a bunch of different things. It did show up in his blood work later on, but the reason why he was not getting results, even though he was doing everything by the book, is that he was not healthy. His body was not functioning properly, meaning that he was not able to benefit from the workout. And the workouts were actually making it much worse for him because he was not recovering. And the diet, even though it was healthy, just because it had carbs in it, were also making it worse for him. So we had to have a very specific solution. And over the years, I've noticed that you may have again, I'm going to disregard genetics. I'm going to focus on just having a strong why, be very driven, do everything by the book. Even your environment may be supportive, but if you're unhealthy, you have an underlying health condition, it can completely ruin everything. And unfortunately, I would say that it does happen very often. So the common things are things that affect your metabolism, so metabolic disorders. There's also hormonal disorders. So I've had guys with low testosterone, for example. Well, guess what? No matter how hard you're training in the gym, if your testosterone is low, nothing's going to happen. And the other problem is if you have low testosterone, you probably don't want to be in the gym. I mean, I've had guys have panic attacks just because their testosterone is very low and being in the gym was so stressful for them. Another common one is health, gut problems. Sorry. So if your gut is all messed up, it can affect your mood, it can affect how you think, it can affect your ability to recover, your ability to lose fat. And this is again super, super common, especially for people who have abused pharmaceuticals or alcohol in the past. Most people have problems with their gut and digestion, and that's also going to affect the results that you're getting. So I want to end it here and say that disregard genetics. They're not the most important thing unless you're trying to compete in a sport, in which case, yes, genetics are super important for regular people just to be lean, add more muscle. Everybody can do it. I've never seen somebody being limited in terms of their genetics and not being able to achieve results, but you got to have a strong why. That's not something I can do for you. You got to have this already. If you don't have it, something has to happen in order to get it. Your environment has to support you, and at the end of the day, your health. So if you're having problems with health, definitely get them addressed. Unfortunately, with the health component, I cannot help you. So with genetics and with health, I'm not going to be able to assist you with that. However, in terms of having the correct plan and giving you tips and advice to how to optimize your environment and how to even like in terms of mindset, how to think about certain things, I can definitely do this for you. So I'm going to end it here. Hopefully this was useful for you. Of course, if you have some questions, you can always hit me up, and till next time.